Rosa Ellis had lived a life full of joy and hardship, and through it all, she had carried herself with grace and dignity. At 84 years old, her body was slowing down, but her spirit was as strong as ever. Her gray hair was neatly tied in a bun beneath a floral scarf, and she still wore her clothes with elegance, even if they weren't as fancy as the newer styles. There was something timeless about her presence. It was the kind of quiet strength that commanded respect without asking for it. On this particular morning, Rosa was dressed in her Sunday best, a light blue dress that had seen better days, a small purse, and her favorite pair of comfortable shoes. She wasn't here for a fancy occasion. No, this day was about something far more personal. Her grandson, Michael. Michael had invited her to a special event at his company's headquarters. He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar construction firm, one of the biggest in the city, and today he was delivering a keynote speech at a major industry conference. Michael had always been the apple of Rosa's eye. She'd raised him with love and sacrificed everything for him to have the opportunities she never had. She knew this was a significant moment in his career, and she was determined to be there. Rosa wasn't someone who sought the limelight. She had always preferred to stay in the background, supporting those she loved without expecting anything in return. But today she wanted to be there for Michael, to show him that no matter how much success he achieved, she would always be there, cheering him on. She didn't need fancy clothes or expensive accessories to feel proud. She had built her legacy with hard work and love, not with material things. Rosa stepped out of her apartment, her cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement as she made her way to the corner. She had called for a taxi using her old flip phone, the one she'd had for years. It was nothing special, but it worked, and that's all she needed. The taxi arrived, a plain yellow car, and Rosa slowly made her way to the back door. She wasn't in a hurry. She was just enjoying the moment. The quiet streets, the anticipation of seeing Michael, the feeling of being needed. But when the taxi driver saw her, his expression shifted. He didn't smile. He didn't open the door for her. Instead, he stared at her with a mixture of confusion and impatience, as if she were an inconvenience. Rosa smiled faintly and waved her hand, signaling that she was ready to get in. But the driver didn't budge. "You sure this is your ride?" he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. Rosa's heart sank. She had been in taxis countless times before, but this was different. She didn't understand it at first. She had grown accustomed to the subtle ways in which people could be unkind, but this felt different. The driver didn't even try to hide his judgment. Without a word, he opened the door, but didn't help her inside. Rosa hesitated for a moment before managing to slide into the back seat, her movements slow but deliberate. She adjusted her purse on her lap and tried to ignore the discomfort creeping up her spine. "Where to?" the driver asked, his tone still cold, but with an air of dismissive indifference. 150 Park Avenue, please," Rosa replied softly, trying to keep her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. The driver didn't acknowledge her response. He just started driving, his eyes glued to the road as if he couldn't care less about who sat in the back seat. The ride was quiet, except for the sound of the radio blaring some loud pop music that made Rosa's head ache. She wanted to ask the driver to turn it down, but she didn't want to make a scene. She'd learned long ago that it was better to keep the peace. But as she sat there, looking out the window, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the taxi drove through the busy city streets, Rosa's thoughts turned to Michael. She was so proud of him. He had always been a determined young man, and she had supported him through every step of his journey, from his early days in school to his rise in the corporate world. Michael had worked hard to get where he was, and now he was about to speak to an audience that would be listening to his every word. He had come so far, and she was thrilled to be a part of this moment. But despite her excitement, Rosa couldn't ignore the way she felt in that moment. The silence between her and the driver weighed heavily on her. She had spent her life building a sense of self-respect, and yet there were still moments when she felt invisible, when people saw her for her age and her appearance rather than who she really was. The taxi reached its destination, and as the car slowed to a stop in front of the Grand Conference building, the driver didn't speak a word. He didn't even offer to help her out of the car. He just sat there staring ahead. Rosa, feeling the sting of his disregard, opened the door herself. She wasn't surprised, not really. She had experienced this kind of treatment before, but it hurt just the same. She had worked hard her entire life, and yet here she was, still being treated like she didn't matter, simply because of her age and the way she looked. She slowly made her way toward the entrance of the building, holding her head high despite the pain in her heart. She wasn't just an old woman. She was a woman with a lifetime of experiences, a woman who had raised a family, who had built a legacy of love and care. She wasn't invisible, but as she approached the entrance, she saw the staff and security guards standing at the doors. They didn't look at her. They didn't greet her. In fact, it almost seemed as if they were purposefully avoiding making eye contact. She tried not to let it bother her, but it did. Rosa stepped inside the building, but she could feel the coldness around her. She made her way to the elevator and pressed the button to take her to the top floor, where Michael would be speaking. She wasn't going to let this moment ruin her day. She was there for him, and she was going to be proud of everything he had accomplished. But as she stood waiting for the elevator, she couldn't shake the feeling that the world was still judging her, still seeing her as something less than. The way the driver had treated her, the way the staff ignored her, it was all too familiar. It was a reminder of the world's subtle bias against people like her, those who had lived a long life, those who didn't fit into society's narrow definitions of worth. As the elevator doors opened and she stepped inside, Rosa took a deep breath. She wasn't going to let this define her day. She was there for Michael, and that's all that mattered. Today was about him, and she wasn't going to let the world's judgment take that from her. But little did Rosa know, the encounter she had with the taxi driver and the treatment she received from the staff would set off a chain of events that would change everything. Not just for her, but for everyone involved. It would ignite a fire within her grandson, Michael, a fire that would burn with the power of justice, dignity, and respect for all. And nothing would ever be the same again. Rosa Ellis was no stranger to prejudice. It was something she had faced for years, having lived through the painful realities of racism and ageism. But there was something different about the way she was treated that day, something that made her heart ache more than it had in a long time. After she arrived at the building where Michael's event was being held, she was eager to see him. She hadn't seen him in a while, and she was looking forward to hearing all about his progress. But the moment she stepped into the lobby, something felt off. The staff, busy as they were, seemed to avoid making eye contact with her, as though she wasn't even there. Rosa took a deep breath and reminded herself to stay calm. She wasn't going to let a few rude people ruin her day. Michael had always made her feel valued and loved, and that was what mattered. She moved toward the entrance of the elevator, keeping her back straight and her chin high, though the heaviness in her chest grew with each step. She had learned to live with the discomfort, the subtle reminders that the world often overlooked her, especially as she got older. As she approached the elevator, a security guard standing by the door eyed her suspiciously. He didn't greet her or offer assistance. He merely stared at her for a moment before asking in a cold, disinterested tone, "Can I help you, ma'am?" Rosa was taken aback by the dismissiveness in his voice. "I'm here to see my grandson," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "He's the CEO of this company. I'm just looking for the conference where he's speaking." The guard gave a curt nod and motioned toward the elevator, his gaze immediately shifting away from her. "No. Welcome? No. Have a great day." He simply turned back to his post, making it clear that he had no further interest in helping her. Rosa tried not to let it bother her, but she couldn't help but feel a wave of sadness wash over her. Was she really invisible in this place? Did her age, her appearance, make her unworthy of a little kindness? The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. As the elevator ascended, she looked at her reflection in the mirror, silently chastising herself for feeling so out of place. She had worked hard her whole life, raised a family, built a legacy, and yet here she was, made to feel like an outsider, unwanted. But what hurt the most wasn't just the lack of respect. It was the way people treated her as if she didn't matter. She had been the backbone of her family, the one who had supported Michael through thick and thin. She had sacrificed so much to ensure he had the opportunities she had never had, And yet, in that moment, it felt like none of it mattered. When the elevator doors opened, she made her way toward the conference hall, hoping to find Michael before the event started. As she entered, she noticed the people milling around, chatting excitedly about the keynote speech. No one seemed to notice her. No one looked at her and smiled. She was just another elderly woman in the crowd, blending into the background. A few of the staff members standing near the entrance glanced at her, their eyes quickly shifting away when they saw her. Rosa couldn't help but feel the sting. This wasn't the first time this had happened to her, but it still hurt just the same. No one even offered to help her find Michael, to guide her to her seat. Instead, she stood alone, feeling as though she were invisible to everyone around her. Rosa didn't want to make a scene. She didn't want to draw attention to herself, but she couldn't help feeling the weight of the moment. She had always told Michael that he should never let anyone treat him like he didn't matter. But here she was, treated as if she didn't matter. Not by one person, but by an entire room of people who couldn't even be bothered to offer a simple greeting. As she stood there in the middle of the room, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned around and saw a young man with a warm smile, dressed in a crisp suit. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked politely. Rosa's heart skipped a beat. For the first time that day, someone seemed to see her. She smiled softly, grateful for the kindness. "I'm looking for my grandson, Michael. He's speaking today. Do you know where I can find him?" The young man nodded, his smile widening. "Of course. Let me take you to him." Rosa felt a small sense of relief as she followed the young man through the crowd. As they walked toward the front, she caught sight of Michael standing at the podium, preparing for his speech. She felt a surge of pride. Her grandson had made it. He had worked so hard, and now he was about to speak to a room full of powerful people. She had always known he would make it far, but seeing him here, in this moment, was more than she could have ever imagined. But as she made her way closer to the stage, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being ignored, still being treated as less than. The young man who had helped her had been kind, but the rest of the people in the room had barely noticed her. No one had offered to show her to her seat, and even as she sat down in the front row, she couldn't help but feel that same isolation that had followed her all day. As Michael began his speech, his voice strong and confident, Rosa leaned back in her seat and tried to focus on him. She was so proud of him, but at the same time, the injustice of how she had been treated weighed heavily on her heart. Michael was about to speak to the crowd, but what she couldn't have known was that the disrespect she had just experienced would soon have far-reaching consequences. A shift was coming, one that would force the world around her to confront its assumptions and biases. A shift led by the very person who had been the target of her sacrifices. And Michael was not going to let anyone, no matter their position or authority, treat his grandmother like she didn't matter. The truth was about to be revealed, and the entire construction site, the very place where he had worked so hard to build his empire, was going to feel the full weight of his actions. As Rosa sat quietly in the front row, her thoughts still lingering on the moments of dismissal she had just experienced, she tried to focus on the reason she was there. Michael, her grandson, about to take the stage. She had always known that he would be successful. He was determined, hard-working, and the kind of person who could achieve anything he set his mind to. But what she didn't know was that this day would lead to a reckoning that no one, not even Michael, had anticipated. Michael stood backstage, moments away from giving his keynote speech. The anticipation was palpable. His team, his colleagues, and business partners all waited eagerly for him to take the stage and deliver the message that had taken months to prepare. But something felt off. As the event was about to begin, his assistant whispered in his ear, "There's been an issue with your grandmother, sir." Michael's eyes widened in concern. Rosa, what was going on? He quickly excused himself and made his way to the front of the stage, where he saw his grandmother sitting. Her face was calm, but Michael could see the subtle sadness in her eyes. It was a look he recognized, the same expression that had appeared when she was silently enduring the hardships of life. He had always admired her strength, but in that moment, something inside him snapped. He had built his success on the principles of respect and integrity. He had always known how important it was to treat everyone with dignity, no matter their background or appearance. But now, seeing the pain on his grandmother's face, He realized that the world still had a long way to go in recognizing the humanity of those who were often overlooked. He couldn't let this go. As he walked toward her, his thoughts were already racing. What had happened? What had they said to her? Why was she being treated this way? He had no time to waste. When Michael approached the front row, he asked his assistant, "What happened?" "Apparently there was an issue at the security checkpoint. Your grandmother was stopped and treated poorly," his assistant explained, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "She was told she didn't belong here." Michael's heart sank. The anger that had been building within him now boiled over. It was one thing to hear about injustice happening to someone else, but it was entirely different when it happened to someone he loved. His grandmother, a woman who had raised him with love and taught him everything he knew about resilience, had been treated like she didn't matter. Michael's fist clenched at his sides. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. He would make sure that no one, was ever treated this way again. He couldn't undo what had happened to Rosa, but he could take immediate action to ensure that this type of disrespect would never be tolerated in his presence. Taking a deep breath, he turned toward the back of the hall, scanning the room for the construction supervisor in charge. Without hesitation, he walked up to him and said firmly, "I need the security footage from this morning. Now." The supervisor, noticing the intensity in Michael's eyes, didn't question him. He immediately complied, and within moments, Michael was watching the video feed on a nearby screen. As he watched the footage of Rosa, standing alone and being ignored by staff, his anger intensified. The footage was clear. Rosa, an elderly woman, had been treated with disdain, humiliated, and ignored by the very people who were supposed to welcome her. Michael paused the video. His voice was low but steady. "This ends today. This isn't just about my grandmother. It's about everyone who has ever been treated this way." He turned back to his team, his expression now one of unwavering resolve. "I'm going to address this now. No one gets away with treating people like this. We are better than this, and I will make sure the entire company knows it." He walked back onto the stage, taking a moment to compose himself before addressing the crowd. He wasn't going to hide behind corporate jargon or pretend that everything was fine. No, this was personal. "Good afternoon, everyone," Michael began, his voice cutting through the room. "Today I want to address something that goes beyond business, beyond profits, and beyond the numbers. It's about respect, and it's about the way we treat people, regardless of their age, appearance, or status." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "This morning, my grandmother was treated with disrespect at our company's security checkpoint. She was made to feel invisible, and that is unacceptable. No one, no matter their age or how they look, should ever feel like they don't matter." The crowd fell silent. Michael could feel the weight of his words, and he could see the shift in the room. People weren't just listening, they were reflecting. "I don't care how successful we become," he continued. "We will never be a company that tolerates mistreatment. I'm here to make it clear that from this point forward, we will have mandatory empathy training for all employees, from security to customer service. And we will be installing feedback cameras at every checkpoint so that we can hold ourselves accountable." He paused again, his gaze sweeping across the room. "We're also rolling out a new initiative, Respect First, which will require all of our teams to prioritize human dignity in every interaction. We will do better, we will be better, and we will make sure no one is ever treated the way my grandmother was today." The room was still, but Michael could see the nods of agreement from several of the executives. They knew this wasn't just about business. It was about leadership and humanity. Michael wasn't just changing his company. He was setting a new standard, one that prioritized kindness and respect over everything else. As the room began to stir with discussions, Michael felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about firing people or making a statement. It was about setting an example. He was showing the world what true leadership looked like, and that to him was worth more than anything money could buy. "I'll be checking in personally to ensure that these changes are implemented," Michael added, his voice strong. "We are not just a company that builds buildings. We are a company that builds people. And from this day forward, every person who walks through our doors will be treated with the respect they deserve." With that, Michael stepped off the stage, his heart still heavy, but also lighter knowing that he had done what was right. Rosa would never have to endure that kind of treatment again, and neither would anyone else. 1 month had passed since Michael had taken action. The atmosphere at the construction site, once charged with tension and apathy, had begun to shift. Employees who had once shown indifference to each other's struggles now spoke with kindness. The hard edges of disrespect that had once permeated the environment were slowly being replaced with something softer, more considerate. Rosa had been back to visit several times, and each time, things felt different. The workers now greeted her with smiles, and the security staff made sure she was welcomed with the care and respect she deserved. What was once cold and dismissive had transformed into warm hospitality. The construction site had implemented new policies under Michael's directive. The Respect First program had gone into full effect, with mandatory empathy training for everyone, from the site workers to the security personnel. The feedback cameras installed at key locations allowed both employees and customers to voice their experiences, ensuring that everyone was held accountable. It wasn't just a business change, it was a cultural shift. On that particular day, as Rosa arrived for her weekly visit, she noticed something immediately different. The security guard at the entrance, a young man she had seen briefly the first time she visited, stood up as she approached. He didn't just glance at her or mutter a generic greeting. He looked her in the eyes with a genuine smile. "Good morning, ma'am. How are you today?" he asked. Rosa was taken aback by the warmth in his voice. She hadn't expected that kind of kindness. She had expected the usual robotic politeness, but this was different. This was genuine. "I'm doing well, thank you," she replied, smiling as she made her way into the building. Inside, the construction workers who had once sneered at her now nodded politely, offering her a courteous greeting. Michael had not only changed the culture of his company, but he had instilled in everyone a sense of community, respect, and dignity. It wasn't just about treating people like customers or employees. It was about treating them as human beings. Michael's actions had sparked something bigger than a simple change in protocol. It was a fundamental shift in how people viewed each other and how they viewed the elderly. The lessons from the incident at the checkpoint were still fresh in everyone's minds, and the people who worked with Michael and Rosa had learned something invaluable. Everyone deserves respect, no matter their age, race, or station in life. When Michael met Rosa that afternoon, he could see the difference in her demeanor. She walked with a little more confidence, a little more pride. Her posture, once slightly hunched with the weight of the world, had straightened. She was no longer the quiet, invisible figure she had been made to feel like on that first visit. She was seen, she was heard, and most importantly, she was respected. "I'm so proud of you, Michael," Rosa said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You've done more than just change this company. You've changed lives, and for that I'm grateful." Michael smiled softly, his eyes full of love and admiration for his grandmother. He had always respected her, but seeing her finally receive the recognition she deserved, the recognition she had earned throughout her entire life, made him feel like the real work was just beginning. "I didn't do it alone, Grandma," he said, his voice low. "I did it for you, and for everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't matter. This is about more than just policies. This is about humanity." Rosa looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "I always knew you were destined for greatness, Michael, but you've proven to me that greatness doesn't just come from business deals or making money. It comes from doing the right thing, from standing up for the people who can't stand up for themselves." The sound of construction workers in the background was no longer filled with tension. Instead, there was laughter, conversation, and a sense of camaraderie that had been missing before. Rosa realized that Michael hadn't just built a business. He had built a place where people treated each other with kindness and empathy. As the afternoon wore on, Michael took Rosa by the hand and led her through the site. She marveled at the changes, the smiling faces of the workers, the easy conversations, and the lighthearted atmosphere. It was no longer a cold, impersonal workspace. It was a community, a family, and it was all thanks to Michael's decision to take a stand. Later that day, as Rosa was getting ready to leave, Michael stood by the door with her, his hand on her shoulder. "Grandma, I want you to know something," Michael said, his voice soft but resolute. "The world needs to see people like you. People who have been overlooked, ignored, or dismissed for far too long. You've taught me how to be strong, and how to fight for what's right. And I'll never stop fighting for you and for others who deserve to be seen. Rosa squeezed his hand, her heart full. You've already done more than enough, Michael. You've shown the world that respect is a right, not a privilege. And for that, I'll always be proud of you. As she left the site that day, Rosa felt lighter than she had in years. She had witnessed firsthand the transformation of a place she had once been made to feel invisible in. But now, thanks to Michael's leadership and the changes he had initiated, she knew she was no longer just an old woman in the background. She was seen, she was valued, and she was heard. And that, to her, was worth more than any achievement or accolade. It was the kind of legacy that would last for generations. Rosa Ellis was 84 years old. For most of her life, she had moved through the world with a quiet grace. Always thoughtful, always composed. She had learned early on the importance of dignity, both for herself and for others. Despite her age, she still carried herself with the same elegance that had earned her respect in every room she entered. She had a smile that could light up even the darkest spaces and a presence that made everyone around her feel comfortable, seen, and heard. It wasn't something she had to try at, it was just who she was. That day, however, she felt a strange unease gnawing at her. She wasn't moving as quickly as she used to, her steps a little slower than they had been in her younger days. But Rosa had never let age define her, and she wasn't about to let it stop her from attending her grandson Michael's big moment. Michael, her pride and joy, was about to give the keynote speech at a major conference in New York City, a milestone in his career. She had been there for him from the beginning, waking up early every day to make sure he had everything he needed, just as she had done for all her children. She never missed an opportunity to support him. She had always told Michael, "You don't have to wear a suit to look good, son. Just wear your confidence." As Rosa carefully arranged her cardigan and adjusted the wide-brimmed hat she had chosen for the day, she felt a wave of satisfaction. She may not have been as spry as she once was, but she had earned the right to walk slowly, to enjoy the moment, to appreciate the fact that her hard work had led to this. Her son and his children had all grown into remarkable people. She was proud of them, especially Michael. She called a taxi using the app on her old reliable phone, the same one she had used for years, though it seemed to have trouble keeping up with the latest technology. She didn't mind. It worked, and that's all that mattered to her. The ride would be short, but it didn't matter. She was going to see Michael shine. When the taxi arrived, Rosa stood up from her porch, careful not to lose her balance, and made her way to the car. The driver, a middle-aged white man, didn't immediately open the door for her. He didn't even make eye contact. Rosa, ever patient, smiled and gave a gentle wave to let him know she was ready. He glanced at her and without a word got out of the car. But instead of opening the door like she expected, he stood by the driver's side, leaning against the car as though she was an inconvenience. A small lump formed in Rosa's throat, but she pushed it away. She was used to these little moments, the ones that made you feel less than, not quite part of the world around you. And as she slowly made her way to the passenger side, she noticed that the man's eyes flicked to her with an almost dismissive glance. Rosa opened the door herself. She was still strong, still independent, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made her feel small, like she didn't belong. She settled into the back seat, adjusting her purse on her lap, and stared out the window, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that had settled in her chest. The ride to the venue should have been peaceful, but Rosa could feel the tension building in her. It wasn't about the inconvenience of not having the door open for her. It wasn't even about the brief, uncomfortable silence. No, what bothered her more was the feeling that she was invisible, that her age, her appearance, her very presence was somehow not worthy of respect. She had experienced this before, of course. People didn't always understand the value of someone who had lived a long life. But today, for some reason, it stung more than it ever had. As the car made its way through the bustling streets of New York, Rosa tried to steady her breath. She wouldn't let this little incident ruin her day, not when Michael was waiting for her. She had been with him every step of the way, supporting him through the tough times, celebrating the victories, big and small. Today was about him. She would focus on that. But when they arrived at the event venue, her nerves were still buzzing. The man didn't open the door for her again. He simply turned back to look at her with the same expression he'd worn when she first entered the car. Rosa took a deep breath, steadying herself. She didn't want to make a fuss. She was raised to handle things with grace, to move through the world with quiet dignity. But as she slowly climbed out of the car, the sting from earlier seemed to stay with her. Michael was about to make his debut in front of an audience that would shape the next chapter of his career. And here she was, feeling less than. It wasn't right. Rosa couldn't help but feel that she deserved better, not just as Michael's grandmother, but as a woman who had worked hard her entire life. A woman who had sacrificed for the people she loved.